It was a cold, foggy night when Nathan, a young taxi driver, decided to take one last ride before heading home. He was tired, but he couldn't resist the lure of a final fare. It had been a slow day after all. As he drove through the empty streets, his taxi meter ticking softly, his radio buzzed with static before announcing, "Heavy fog advisory. Travelers are urged to stay indoors tonight." Nathan smirked and turned the radio off. Just one more trip, he thought. What could go wrong? Suddenly, his taxi app buzzed. A request popped up, originating from a desolate part of town near the old Ravenswood Cemetery. It was odd. He'd never picked up a fare from there before, but money was money. He accepted the ride and made his way into the foggy outskirts of the city. The streets became narrower, and the fog thickened, swallowing the faint glow of his headlights. As he approached the cemetery gates, he saw a lone figure standing under a flickering street lamp. The man wore an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by shadows. Nathan hesitated but finally rolled down the window. "Nathan, are you Mr. Grayson?" The man simply nodded and slid into the back seat without a word. The man's presence was unsettling. He didn't speak, but his silence was heavy, as though the air in the car had thickened. Nathan tried to break the tension. "Nathan." "So, where to?" The man handed him a slip of paper with an address written in spidery handwriting. It was an abandoned neighborhood Nathan knew well. No one had lived there in years. Nathan drove on, trying to ignore the growing unease that crept over him. Every so often, he glanced at the rearview mirror, but the fog seemed to cling to the back seat, obscuring the man's features. The man's faint breathing was the only sound, and even that felt wrong. Like it didn't belong. Halfway to the address, the GPS abruptly rerouted, taking them down an unfamiliar road. The trees on either side loomed like skeletal hands, their branches scratching at the taxi's windows as if trying to get in. Nathan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel. "Nathan, this doesn't seem right." Then the man finally spoke, his voice a low, guttural whisper. "Mysterious passenger. Keep driving." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Nathan's stomach churned, but he obeyed. The road seemed endless, stretching into an abyss of fog and shadows. Suddenly the engine sputtered, and the car lurched to a halt. Nathan's heart raced as he checked the fuel gauge. It was full, yet the car wouldn't start. Nathan turned to apologize to the passenger, but his breath caught in his throat. The back seat was empty. The man was gone. Panic set in as Nathan stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the freezing air. He called out into the darkness, but his voice echoed back eerily as if the fog were mocking him. Then he noticed something chilling. A headstone illuminated by his flickering headlights. It bore the name Samuel Grayson and the date of death, 1914. Nathan's blood ran cold. That was the name of his passenger. He scrambled back to the car, slamming the door shut, but the radio crackled to life, spewing distorted whispers. "You should have turned back! You should have turned back!" Suddenly the man reappeared in the rearview mirror, his face pale and eyes hollow. "Mysterious passenger, you can't leave now!" His voice reverberated with unnatural echoes. The taxi began to move on its own, speeding down the foggy road as Nathan screamed, helpless to stop it. The next morning, local authorities found Nathan's taxi abandoned in the woods near Ravenswood Cemetery. The doors were locked and the engine was cold. Inside, the driver's seat was empty, but the back seat bore an imprint, as if someone, or something, had been sitting there recently. Nathan was never seen again, but some say that on foggy nights, you can still spot his taxi roaming the outskirts of town, searching for passengers. And if you're unlucky enough to hail it, you might just become the next to disappear. The video ends with a close-up of a foggy road and a distant pair of headlights slowly approaching. The screen fades to black as haunting music crescendos, leaving viewers with a final message. Title: "Would you take the ride?"